W. Bush of the state of Texas has received for President of the United States 271 votes. Al Gore of the state of Tennessee has received 266 votes. May God bless our new president and our new vice president, and may God bless the United States of America.
Well, that's the big story this morning. Georgia. But also on this day, exactly 20 years ago, Vice President Al Gore certified the victory of his opponent, George W. Bush, in the bitterly contested 2000 presidential election. Will Vice President Mike Pence also follow the Constitution today? He'll be presiding over a joint session of Congress where a handful of Republicans plan to object to President-elect Joe Biden's victory. Capitol Hill may soon look very different, though, as Georgia just put Democrats within striking distance of taking control of the U.S. Senate. Democrat Raphael Warnock has defeated Republican Kelly Loeffler in one of the state's pivotal runoff elections.
May my story be an inspiration to some young person who is trying to grasp and grab hold of the American dream. And so, Georgia, I am honored by the faith that you have shown in me. And I promise you this tonight. I am going to the Senate to work for all of Georgia.
The other race between Jon Ossoff and David Perdue is too close to call, with both campaigns saying they will be victorious in the end. It's all put the president on edge. He is ginning up supporters who will gather in Washington today, and that's amid new threats of violence. But as Joe likes to say, focus on the signal, not the noise. Donald Trump's presidency ends in 14 days, and his desperation grows by the hour. Good morning and welcome to Morning Joe. It is Wednesday, January 6th. Along with Joe, Willie, and me, we have White House reporter for the Associated Press, Jonathan Lemire, host of MSNBC's Politics Nation and president of the National Action Network, Reverend Al Sharpton.
So,
wow.
Willie, let's focus right now on the signal. Ignore the ground noise. There may be a lot of clattering, banging of pots and pans, screaming, yelling, weeping and gnashing of teeth. But the signal right now, what matters the most is that the Democratic Party pulled off a shocking upset deep in the deepest heart of Dixie, in the state of Georgia, and elected the first black Democratic senator to serve in the United States Senate. There's so much to go over this morning. We will go over it. Right now, there's another race still up in the air. Many people are looking, many experts are looking at the votes where they're coming in from and believe the Democrats have a very good chance, a better than even chance of winning that seat as well and taking over the United States Senate. Much to talk about, and also much blame to be spread this morning among Republicans for losing two seats that they should have won.
Yeah, the stakes could not have been higher. Today is a day loaded with history. The Reverend Raphael Warnock, who grew up the 11th of 12 children in a housing project in Savannah, Georgia, rose to become the pastor at Ebenezer Baptist Church, which was the home church, of course, of Martin Luther King, now a United States Senator. Jon Ossoff is on the doorstep. We haven't called that race at NBC News yet. We'll get more votes. Steve Kornacki, who'll be with us in a moment, was just saying that Fulton County should get more vote in sometime later this afternoon. So we may know by this afternoon that Georgia has turned blue for two senators and also, of course, for Joe Biden by a handful of votes a couple of months ago. And then today, of course, that pushes us into this historic, again, joint session of Congress, where Mike Pence, the vice president, has been asked by the president of the United States to somehow overturn the will of the people. According to our reporting, Mike Pence has now told President Trump he doesn't have the power to do that. So again, that's the noise. The signal is that Joe Biden's election will be certified by Congress today.
Well, it's going to be interesting to see how Republicans respond today to the events of last night. You had Mitch McConnell warning them time and again to not do what 11, 12 of them are doing today, what Kelly Loeffler said she was going to do. Probably contributed to her defeat with those suburban Atlanta voters that were offended by the outrageous behavior of Donald Trump over the past month, and the fact that too many Republicans were going along with it. There's a reason why Mitch McConnell was telling Republicans, don't make fools of yourselves. Don't try to undermine this election. He knew that his status as majority leader of the United States Senate was at risk. But Josh Hawley, he thinks he might run for president in 2024. Ted Cruz thinks he might want to lose running for president of the United States again in 2024. And so they didn't listen to him. And if the votes go the way we expect them to go, Mitch McConnell will be minority leader. I think in large part because Josh Hawley, Ted Cruz, and other Republicans in the Senate played right into the hands of the conspiracy theorists, of the QAnon types, and by their fearless leader, Donald J. Trump. But, Reverend, we have to talk about exactly what's going on in America. We've been through a brutal 4 years. We've had a president who is the majority of Americans have said they believed was racist. And yet here we have, in my native state, in the state of Georgia, the home of Lester Maddox. I think Maddox was probably governor around the time that I was born. Here we have in the state of Georgia, a state that deep in the heart of the old Confederacy, a state that voted to elect America's first black vice president in November, and a state that just voted to elect the Democratic Party's first black senator. What does that mean about where this country is after 4 years of Donald Trump?
It means that this country has really come back unto showing that we're not going backwards to the days of legal apartheid or segregation and divisiveness, that despite his best efforts and his demagoguery, Donald Trump has played to a dwindling crowd of people that want to play us against them. And to lose in Georgia, Raphael Warnock, a capable candidate, but was aided by Stacey Abrams and others that really generated that kind of groundswell. And I think we're trending toward Ossoff winning. To think, Joe, that a black and a Jew would win in Georgia shows that this country is moving a lot further than Donald Trump thought. And I know Raphael well. I preached for him, known him when he went to school in New York. And I think the one that is ecstatic is Chuck Schumer, who was one of those that called many of us to encourage him to run and who may end up majority leader. I want to thank Donald Trump for being Donald Trump, because if he had not been acting in the asinine way he had, I do not believe we would have had the victory in Georgia. The fact that he is so bullheaded and stubborn, I think that he has aided and abetted the takeover of the Democrats of the Senate, at least to match them 50-50 with a tie vote to the first black woman and the first woman vice president. No one could have messed it up like you did, Mr. President, and we're going to be ever grateful for you going out and ushering in a new day in America that brings us back to where we ought to be.
We're going to have John Meacham on a little bit later on, but John has an incredible podcast series called They Said It, and he goes through the great speeches in modern American history. One of them is a speech of Martin Luther King the night of April 3rd, 1968 in Memphis, the night before he died. And he talked about the fact that he might not reach the promised land, but God's allowed him to look over the mountaintop. And I just hope, Mika, one of the things that he saw when he looked over the mountaintop was a pastor preaching from his pulpit, becoming the first black United States senator in the Democratic Party.
Well,
what an accomplishment.
A little later on in the show, Raphael Warnock will be our guest right here on Morning Joe. So we look forward to that interview. But let's go to the big board right now. National political correspondent for NBC News and MSNBC, Steve Kornacki, has been on it all night, and he can tell us where things stand right now, especially with Jon Ossoff. How much of the vote is in, and where are we looking at coming from next?
Yeah, Mika. So the vast majority of the vote is in, but basically here you see the lead for Ossoff right now sits at 16,370 votes. That is 0.4 of 1 point. Ossoff over Perdue. A couple things to keep in mind. The recount threshold in Georgia, a candidate needs to be within 0.5 of 1% in order to request a recount. So if Perdue falls short here and is within 0.5%, he could have a recount at that point. So I point out that 0.4 because we're getting awfully close to that threshold there of 0.5. What we saw happen overnight is this happened just in very, very slow motion, probably sometime around 11 o'clock last night. DeKalb County here, a little bit of Atlanta, right around Atlanta. We knew there was going to be a major drop of vote overnight here. All of the early vote that was cast in DeKalb County was going to come overnight. It came in 3 or 4 increments over the night. The last one a little after 4 a.m. You could see how heavily Democratic this is. The installments that were coming overnight were 80, 85, 90% Democratic. So what that did is it put Ossoff, in the early morning hours, he was trailing in the count over Perdue. The DeKalb vote coming in overnight is what lifted Ossoff to this lead over Perdue. And in the other race, it's what allowed Warnock to move it over to a 50,000 vote advantage. So if Ossoff, though, is at 16,370 this morning, where does it go from here? The biggest outstanding piece of real estate is right next to DeKalb County. That's Fulton County. That's the biggie. That's Atlanta, the immediate Atlanta area, biggest county in the state. What is left to come in Fulton County? About 7,500 mail-in ballots. It's the only ballot that's left there, the mail-in ballot. Now, we don't know exactly how that'll break, but we know Fulton's a Democratic county, and mail-in ballots tend to be the most Democratic kind of vote. So I think you can expect that 7,500 votes there in Fulton County, when tallied, are going to be heavily Democratic, and you can expect that Ossoff margin over Perdue will tick up further when you get those votes. When will we get those votes? As of about 2 this morning is the last time I talked to election officials in Fulton County. They believed at that point that those mail ballots will not be reported until sometime this afternoon. They said they plan to do them all in one batch, all 7,500 at once, not incrementally, but that would be sometime this afternoon. That's the biggest single piece of outstanding real estate. Also, our decision desk believes that in Chatham County, which is where Savannah is, again, this is a blue county. We can show you how the vote has been going in Chatham County. You see it's almost 60-40 for the Democrats. Our decision desk believes there are about 3,000 mail-in ballots that are left to be counted here. The election officials left there overnight. They were not working overnight, so we know that would probably be sometime today. Don't know exactly when, but again, mail-in ballots in a blue county. That is an opportunity for Ossoff between Fulton County, between Chatham County, what's left there to potentially build this thing even further. There's a scattering of mail-in votes, small little bits here and there throughout the state. Nothing, though, that looks as big as what we're talking about here in terms of these counties. Beyond that, you're going to have in a couple days provisional ballots. We don't know exactly how many, maybe about 8,000 of those, but the provisional ballots, typically those are going to be breaking, and certainly they did back in November, about 2-1 for the Democrats. And also there are going to be the overseas ballots, I think about 17,000 of those. You could see a scenario where if you put the provisional and the overseas ballots together, if the worst case for Democrats, there might be a wash in those ballots. So in other words, there are opportunities here between Fulton, Chatham especially, a few other sort of trickles of vote that can come in here. But Ossoff can get this thing certainly over 20,000, maybe well over 20,000. And I think you start talking about, is he going to get that margin over Perdue over that half a point threshold. Again, Joe Biden won the state less than 12,000. Ossoff's over 16,000 this morning and counting.
So too close to call, but things certainly trending in Ossoff's direction. Steve, one of the big questions in both of these races was turnout. Massive turnout operations on both sides, almost $1 billion spent over the course of this race in the state of Georgia. How did turnout look as compared to November? Obviously, tough to get people back out, generally speaking. Tough for Republicans to get people back out with Donald Trump not on the ballot. How did it look last night?
I mean, yeah, this is just, you just add up, you're over 4.3 million votes here cast in this runoff election. I mean, again, this about 5 million was turnout for the November presidential election. That was an astonishing number here in a runoff in January, about 4.3 million, more than 4.3 million. That is an astounding level of turnout. But I think when we talked about that turnout question, we were saying, were we going to see any gaps in the motivation of each party's base? There was a lot of talks. I'll give you two examples here because I think this is one of the stories that emerged as these votes came in. In the run-up to Election Day, there was a lot of talk from Democrats. They believed they had motivated, in particular, African-American voters, not in the Atlanta metro area, but more in rural areas of the state. There's sort of a band of counties here. If you go kind of the Columbus, Albany area, up here sort of between Macon and Augusta, there's a stretch of counties here. A lot of them have large African-American populations. Not all of them are blue, but even the red counties tend to have significant 30-40% black populations. Democrats believed in the early vote. They were saying that they had brought new black voters out in the early voting period who maybe hadn't been there in the November election. They were going to build on November that way. So we were looking for signs in a lot of these counties. Was there a sign that there was something to that? Let me give you an example. Randolph County, a very, very small county right here, but the turnout in Randolph County was 97% of what it was on Election Day. Wow. It was only off 3%. And John Ossoff, there's a large black population here. It's a small county, but the share of the vote that's black is large. Ossoff built on Biden's number. Back in the November election, when it was Ossoff versus Perdue in the preliminary, Ossoff finished several points under Biden here. He didn't just catch the Biden number. He moved 2 points ahead of it. In the turnout level there, again, was very close to what it was back in the November general election. We saw stories like this throughout this part of the state that I'm talking about. Pretty consistent story with Ossoff doing better than Biden in November, in turnout, not being off that much from November. That's the Democratic side. The Republican side of the story, we talked about this a lot as the votes started to come in last night. They were worried coming into Election Day about North Georgia, sort of from north of this line that I just drew right here. When Donald Trump came into Georgia the night before the election, he went to Dalton, Georgia. He went right there. The idea was Republicans didn't like the early vote numbers they were seeing from North Georgia, and they were afraid if they didn't get a huge Election Day turnout, that there was going to be a gap in the enthusiasm and a gap in the turnout. They got the turnout they were looking for in some places, but I saw more than a few examples like this last night, just as he's filled in. So here's just an example, again, in a small county in North Georgia, overwhelmingly Republican. That is in line. Trump got 80% here. Perdue didn't quite get 80%. Republicans want to be doing a little bit better than Trump. So this was a bit of a disappointment in a county like this. But the turnout here was nearly 20% off what it was back in November. And so when you were seeing these gaps of 15 to 20% off of November's turnout, you were seeing them in counties like this. You were seeing them in Republican counties. And when you were seeing the turnout was only off single digits, like I just showed you down in Randolph County, it tended to be in blue counties, tended to be in counties with large African-American populations. So I think there was something to what Democrats were talking about before Election Day about the black vote in rural parts of the state. And I think there was something to those Republican fears about their own base.
It certainly explains why Donald Trump went to Dalton, Georgia, in the closing days of the campaign, and why Kelly Loeffler desperately announced at the very end that she was going to join Ted Cruz and Josh Hawley and those people who probably helped flip the Senate to the Democratic Party along with Donald Trump. Steve Kornacki, I know it's been a long night. Thank you so much for being with us. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Steve.
So much. So, we, Jonathan Lemire, have been talking about it for quite some time, that Republicans have been muttering. Mitch McConnell has certainly been concerned that the craziness we've been reporting on every day coming from Josh Hawley, who now has on his resume, guy that helped make Chuck Schumer majority leader of the United States Senate, most likely, Ted Cruz also contributed mightily to Chuck Schumer being in a position to be majority leader of the United States Senate. We've been talking for some time about how some Republicans, like Mitch McConnell, were very concerned that this is exactly what could happen if Donald Trump had his way. Well, it's happened, and it looks like Donald Trump is going to flip the Senate, is going to flip that Senate to Chuck Schumer, and it'll be Donald Trump and Josh Hawley and Ted Cruz responsible for making Bernie Sanders the chairman of the Budget Committee. I'm just wondering about the recriminations you're already starting to hear around the White House and around this president for playing right into the Democrats' hands.
Joe, on such a historic day, there are two momentous takeaways. First of all, what this means for the Biden presidency. With one seat Warnock claimed and another Ossoff looking good, to suddenly have that 50-50 split in the Senate with Vice President Harris breaking the tie. Yes, to be sure. Is this a glide path for every part of the Biden agenda? No. Joe Manchin and other moderate senators on the Democratic side suddenly have a lot of sway here. But it's going to make things a lot easier, particularly right at the beginning, in terms of getting his cabinet picks through. That will get much easier now, including the upcoming selection for Attorney General. So this changes things for Biden, and it also can't be overstated, Joe, the wreckage that President Trump is now leaving for the Republican Party. On November 3rd, Ossoff was trailing Perdue in the polls by 2 or 3 points most places. Now he seems poised to lose. What changed between November 3rd and now? Donald Trump. Donald Trump's defeat in Georgia and his undermining of the democratic process in Georgia, which we saw most vividly in that phone call over the weekend with the state's Secretary of State. He sowed doubt there among voters. He attacked the Secretary of State of Georgia, a Republican, the governor of Georgia, a Republican, far more than either Ossoff or Warnock, the Democratic candidates in that state. Yes, but Trump remains extremely popular among the rank and file Republicans, particularly in rural areas. That is why he was in Dalton this week. But there have been Republicans who have been nervous for weeks about the impact that he would have on this race, that he was doing far more harm than good. And it seems clear that is what is happening. And today on Capitol Hill, for this certification process of Electoral College, we're going to see the split that Trump has created, the schism within the Republican Party with the Hawleys and the Cruzes and about a dozen others moving to reject the certification of Biden, to declare that he's an illegitimate president, while other Republicans try to hang on to some Democratic norms, leaving Trump in his wake. Certainly, he's not going to go quietly here, even though he won't be in office 2 weeks from today, leaving in his wake wreckage within the Republican Party as it looks forward to 2024. And it appears to be not in control of the Senate either.
And Joe, even Georgia election officials blame this loss squarely on President Trump for so many reasons that we can't get into now. But worth bringing up the coronavirus and President Trump holding super spreader events. How many people got sick over the course of the past 2 months leading up to this election? The numbers still climb in coronavirus deaths. Meanwhile, Democrats campaigned in masks and touching people with elbows and not holding super spreader events. It's just another sort of narrative through this election that showed the difference, where science perhaps had a slight win in this election as well.
Well, again, a lot of things came together to create this historic moment. You've got to put, though, Donald Trump's recklessness at the top of that. And I will say, Rev, again, it takes a lot of things to make Ralph Warnock the first black Democratic senator elected ever in the Deep South. And I know I keep repeating that, but as a son of the South, and I know your family's from the South too, this is an extraordinary first, especially for the Democratic Party, because, Rev, a lot of our younger viewers don't remember that the Democratic Party, certainly after the Civil War through the 1960s, early 1960s, they were the party, especially in the Deep South, even through the late 60s, of segregation. They were the parties that were working hard to oppress black voters. And here we have, again, we talked about the New South in the 1970s, but the South really is looking especially new in 2020 with the state of Georgia going dark blue in the presidential race, and now it looks like it's doing the same in these two Senate races.
I think you're absolutely right to raise it that way, because we're talking about only in a short period of time, maybe 2 or 3 decades, to see a black minister who pastors Martin Luther King's church, who is buried right across the street from the church. John Lewis buried in this Reverend Warnock was John Lewis's pastor. There's a reason Dr. King and John Lewis and Hosea Williams became central figures in the movement of civil rights and voting rights, because they came from Georgia, where Georgia was the epic center of this. It was Lester-Maddox. It was the symbol of where blacks were treated less than human, had to sit in back of buses and the whole 9 yards. To see that election last night, and as I said, it looks like trending that a Jewish American will also win the other side. That black-Jewish coalition that Dr. King and Rabbi Abraham Heschel had is now going to the U.S. Senate and is going to deal with things like police reform and voting rights and other things that Donald Trump tried to stand in the way of. So it goes to a song you and I learned in church growing up as Baptists: weeping may endure for a night, but joy cometh in the morning. Well, this morning on Morning Joe,
Amen.
Joy is coming.
There's going to be a lot of preaching this morning. I think so. Hey, just one last note, as you guys were talking, Joe, about the impact of Donald Trump and his coming into the state and the phone call he made on Saturday to the Secretary of State, Gabriel Sterling, who's the elections official we've all come to know, who's been out front and center, a Republican, again, who said he would have preferred Republicans win these races. He said yesterday in an interview, looking at the prospect of losing these 2 seats and turning over control of the Senate to the Democrats, he said it falls squarely on the shoulders of President Trump and his actions since November 3rd. When you tell people your vote doesn't count and it's been stolen, and people start to believe that, you go to 2 senators and ask the Secretary of State to resign and trigger a civil war in the Republican Party when we need to unite, he said. All of this stems from the president's decision since November 3rd. Again, that's from the Republican election official in Georgia.
And Willie, all the Republican election officials that Donald Trump is bashing, the governor included, they're all Trumpers.
Yeah.
They were all, I mean Brian Kemp, I thought embarrassed himself by how cravenly he followed every twist and turn of Donald Trump. So for Donald Trump to turn on him and Bill Barr because they wouldn't overthrow election results, really stunning. And of course, Mika, that's the negative side of this, but I just want to underline something that Reverend Sharpton said, and that is this happened, yes, happened for the first time in the Deep South. This happened in the Peach State. This happened straight out of the church that none other than John Lewis, where John Lewis attended. He's looking down, smiling, and, not even about Democrats or Republicans winning, but the fact that after 4 years of racial antagonism, that this is how the Trump administration comes to an end, being responsible for creating a backlash that elected America's first black vice president, America's first female president, and now the first black Democratic senator from the South.
Well, we're going to be watching Georgia all morning long as the votes get counted. Again, Raphael Warnock will join us this morning at the top of our 8 o'clock hour, 8 o'clock Eastern time. Plus, Congress is set to certify Joe Biden's election win today. And supporters of President Trump are already flooding into Washington, D.C. to protest. The city's mayor, Muriel Bowser, will be our guest. We'll also speak with Senate Minority Whip Dick Durbin and Democratic Congresswoman Mikey Sherrill. You're watching Morning Joe. We will be right back.
We are not here to curse the darkness. We are here to light a candle. I'm Chuck Rosenberg. On my podcast, The Oath, I talk with people who served with integrity and honor, men and women who light the way. This week, former head of the Guantanamo Review Task Force, Matt Olson.
The initial idea of Guantanamo was ill-conceived, that there could be sort of a legal black hole where we could hold detainees. And it remains a problem in our history, I think, from a counterterrorism perspective.
Join me for Season 4 of The Oath, an MSNBC podcast. Search for The Oath wherever you're listening right now and subscribe. New episodes every Wednesday.
All I want to do is this. I just want to find 11,780 votes, which is one more than we have. No. 11,780 votes that we need. No. 11,780 votes to win the election. No. Fellas, I need 11,000 votes. Give me a break, please. No, sir. Dead people, no. Phony ballots. The women and men started screaming. Stacey Abrams, the internet dominion machines.
Okay, that's good.
That was the internet doing its thing, auto-tuning President Trump in his call with Georgia's Secretary of State to the melody of Seasons of Love from the musical Rent. President Trump and Vice President Mike Pence met for lunch yesterday, and according to both the New York Times and the Washington Post, Pence told the president he lacks the power to block congressional certification of Joe Biden's election win. The Times was the first to report the news. According to the paper, Pence's message came just hours after the president turned up the pressure on the vice president to do his bidding. Yesterday morning, Trump inaccurately tweeted, the vice president has the power to reject fraudulently chosen electors. Pence does not have the unilateral power to alter the results sent by the states to Congress. His role today is a ceremonial one. People briefed on the conversation tell the New York Times that Pence indicated to the president he would keep studying the issue ahead of today's joint session of Congress. Good Lord. According to a person close to Trump, one option being considered was having Pence acknowledge the president's claims about election fraud in some form during one or more of the Senate debates about the results from particular states before the certification. Trump refuted the New York Times report in a statement last night, calling it fake news. He said, quote, the vice president and I are in total agreement and that the vice president has the power to act.
Well, of course, Willie, the vice president doesn't have the power to act. And as Tom Cotton's even telling Josh Hawley and Ted Cruz and the other confederacy of dunces that are doing this, they don't have the power to challenge the electors that the states brought up unless there's an actual dispute. If there are two sets of electors and they have to decide between the two sets of electors, then that's when they have to step in and handle the dispute. But there is no constitutional claim that the president has, that the vice president has, that any of these people who are just humiliating themselves. And by the way, we can say this morning, and who made Mitch McConnell minority leader of the United States Senate. All of these people have absolutely no standing to do this and are only causing great violence to the United States Constitution.
And they know that, Joe. They know that they have no standing to do this. They're constitutional lawyers, many of them. The vice president knows he has no standing. That's why he said to the president of the United States, I'm going to study the issue up until 1 o'clock, perhaps buying himself some more time, whatever that means. Yeah, and you talked about the president turning on the people most loyal to him, Attorney General Barr, many others. Get ready for him to turn on Mike Pence. Mike Pence, he expects that Mike Pence will do the job he's asked him to do, which is to overturn the vote of the American people, which he cannot do. So after about 5 o'clock this afternoon, when this is all over, expect President Trump to turn on his own vice president. And Jonathan Lemire, I know you've been studying this a little bit. You've been reporting on it. What exactly, specifically, has the President of the United States asked Vice President Pence to do? And how is Pence going to handle this today?
Vice President Pence has been nothing but loyal to his boss for 4 years, 5 if you count the 2016 campaign. And this is the reward he's getting, Willie. Yes, the President Trump has turned his attention to the vice president over the last few weeks as it became clear that January 6th today would be his, quote, last line of defense. Again, it's not going to happen. Joe Biden is going to be president. But that is how the people around the president have viewed it, is that today's the day. And he has been pressuring him both privately and publicly. We heard him do so from the stage of the rally the other night in Georgia. We certainly know, our reporting indeed confirms that in their lunch yesterday, the president pushed the vice president to do this again. The vice president is trying to thread a needle here where he is indeed trying to allow the president to air his complaints. He'll give them, it appears, his plan is to give them some sort of oxygen from the Capitol today. But he and his team have insisted that he does not have the ability to overturn things. He's even studied the late 1880s and the laws that were put into place then on the matter. A second set of electors, there is this talk of submitting them to the National Archives. We know that right now the Republicans in the Senate who are going to protest today are going to focus, it looks like, on 3 states in particular, Arizona, Pennsylvania, Georgia, but that's in flux. That has been changing as well because there is no real coherent plan here. This is about a statement. This is about a public relations move. This is about sending a signal, these Republican senators, to the president that they still have his back. And it's also, of course, their attempts to court his supporters. A court attempts to become the heirs to the Trumpist, lane of the Republican Party heading into 2024. Hawley and Cruz, of course, are rumored to be presidential candidates. But the president himself is going to make today, and this is a last point. We shouldn't overlook this. The president himself is supposed to address supporters from the ellipse today. There are thousands of Trump fans coming to Washington, and public officials are deeply concerned about the possibility for violence. Some are encouraging lawmakers at the Capitol to sleep in their offices tonight because they're afraid of what could come in a proceedings that could drag on well past midnight. So this is a concern, and as Trump is leaving and another futile effort to overturn the election fails, he's wreaking more damage to not just the party, but potentially to American citizens in the nation's capital.
Yeah, and we'll be talking to Mayor Muriel Bowser about the potential for violence in the city in just a few moments on Morning Joe. Joining us now, historian, Rogers Chair in the American Presidency at Vanderbilt University, John Meacham. He unofficially advises President-elect Joe Biden. And NBC News Capitol Hill correspondent and host of Way Too Early, Casey Hunt, is with us. And Casey, we can talk about what this means for the Biden presidency, for Trump, for the AG pick, but obviously also what it means for the balance of power on Capitol Hill.
It's a seismic shift, Mika. I think we obviously were watching this closely, and I know Joe had been talking about Republicans who were more and more nervous in the final days of this race. But I think fundamentally, neither side really expected that this would unfold, or certainly wasn't willing to bet a lot of money on it. And it is very difficult to overstate the degree to which this is going to change just how it feels to cover Washington. It's going to change even how things feel today, I think, on Capitol Hill. As all of this drama plays out, the rebuke now is just so clear to President Trump. It's clearer today than it was yesterday. And I think that is going to make a difference. Now, we shouldn't overstate it. It's still going to be very narrow, a 50-50 Senate. We haven't had that since 2001, and they're going to have to adjust kind of how they do business in the committees, for example. But Kamala Harris is going to cast that tie-breaking vote. And I have a couple questions. I think this is going to empower progressives in a significant way. Joe Biden is going to have to focus more on what they want, frankly. The filibuster, they're going to have to decide if they want to keep the filibuster in place. There's going to be a lot of pressure to remove that. And then there's also the question still about Biden's relationship with Mitch McConnell. It has been historically a productive one. They have been able to work together. But frankly, when you're in the minority, you got a lot less to lose. And I'm interested to see how McConnell, considering this just dramatic split in the Republican Party, he's going to have to manage, a stable, basically, of presidential candidates who are going to be trying to embrace the Trump base. That's going to be a tricky spot for him to be as well. But bottom line, a lot more of Joe Biden's priorities are going to receive votes on the floor of the Senate if this race plays out the way, at this point, it seems to be playing out.
Hey everyone, it's Chris Hayes. These days I find it helpful to just take a step back from the day-to-day onslaught of news and take a broader look at the issues I haven't had time to cover on my TV show, All In. Everything from the legacy of racism in America to how community and creativity can flourish amidst a pandemic. I do it each week on my podcast, Why Is This Happening? And I'm joined by uniquely qualified guests like Pulitzer Prize-winning reporter Nicole Hannah-Jones.
Progress does not mean justice or equality or that we are right. After 400 years of Black people being in this country, the time for marking incremental progress and patting ourselves on the back for that has been long over.
Author Rebecca Solnit.
How do we take care of each other in the context of not being able to physically be with each other in ordinary ways?
And many others who help me make sense of what's happening in our society and our world. I really enjoy our conversations. I hope you will too. So join me for new episodes every Tuesday. Just search for Why Is This Happening wherever you're listening right now and subscribe.
I think that's the key, is the votes that will actually see the light of day that would not have seen the light of day had Mitch McConnell remained Senate Majority Leader. And of course, there still could be an upset in that second Georgia race. Perhaps Jon Ossoff won't carry the day in the end, though certainly if you look at where the outstanding votes are, it does seem that Mr. Ossoff is on his way to victory and that Mitch McConnell is on his way to being minority leader, at least over the next 2 years, which is exactly what he was warning Josh Hawley and Ted Cruz about. And they decided that they would rather pose for the crowd, play for the cheap seats, and risk having Bernie Sanders as chairman of the Budget Committee. They got their wish. I hope the publicity was worth it for him. John Meacham, you and I are both sons of the South. I grew up, I was born in the suburbs of Atlanta, Georgia, and I know you were up in Chattanooga. I spent my summers with my grandmom in Dalton, Georgia. And throughout the 60s, as a little kid in the 60s and early 70s. And perhaps it's why Reverend Al and I are so taken by it, by what actually happened, that it's still hard to believe that the Deep South has elected its first black Democratic senator in the middle of the age of Trump, a Democrat in what used to be a deep red state. And Lester Maddox's state is, as a guy who wrote His Truth is Marching On earlier this year, bestseller about John Lewis's extraordinary life. Tell us, what's the historical import of this, especially after 4 years of the United States having a president that in many polls, the majority of Americans said, well, they knew their president was racist.
The last time the pastor of Ebenezer Baptist Church affected a presidential election, affected the national conversation as decisively, was in October of 1960. So exactly 60 years ago, Martin Luther King Jr. had come over from Dexter Avenue to join his father as co-pastor of Ebenezer. He was trying to desegregate Rich's department store in downtown Atlanta, was arrested, was sent to Reidsville, the state penitentiary. Coretta King was terrified. She was pregnant at the time, that her husband wouldn't come back out. And word went up to the Democratic campaign for president, two brothers who were not known for their passion for civil rights, John Kennedy and Robert Kennedy, simply asking, would JFK call Mrs. King and express his concern? Kennedy, in a humane way, said, absolutely. Bobby found out about it and blew up and almost fired Harris Wofford and Sergeant Shriver, who had set this up, and then had a moment of conscience as himself and realized that King had been put away without bail. And so he calls the judge, which was probably totally improper, but he was doing the right thing. And Dr. King's father, Daddy King, said he had endorsed Nixon because he didn't like Roman Catholics. As JFK said, who knew Martin Luther King had a bigot for a father? Said that he had a suitcase full of votes and he was going to go dump them in Jack Kennedy's lap. And that moment in 1960 added to what happens in 64 and 65 and the 55-year journey since then, changed the South and changed America. Here's what's different and remarkable. This time, the pastor of Ebenezer is not at Reidsville. He's going to the United States Senate. And I think that it's hard to imagine, actually, a more vivid American 24 or 36 hours than what we're living through right now, when you think about it. So the black pastor of Ebenezer goes to the United States Senate. May well have a Jewish American United States senator going from Georgia. You have the Electoral College being counted in a process that came out of a controversy in 1801 when we passed the 12th Amendment because it was so messed up. So we have 2 centuries and a quarter of trying to acknowledge the peaceful transfer of power. And we have a demagogic president of the United States, exactly the kind of person the founders set up the system we have, which, however frustrating and difficult, is still the most enduring democratic experiment in the world. We have a president that they did everything they could to prevent trying to incite violence in the streets of Washington. The best of us is on display, and the worst of us is on display. And that's the world that Joe Biden is going to be governing. It's the world that every president has to govern. And, we say a lot of the time, we're a 51% country. Well, now we're a 50-50 country with a vice president. So we remain narrowly divided, but it was a good day yesterday for democracy, and I hope today as well.
John, let's talk about what's going to happen today in that joint session of Congress. You talk about this historic 24 to 36 hours. Another piece of that will be several hours this afternoon, where a group of United States senators, many of them constitutional lawyers, are going to raise objections about the Electoral College. You have a president of the United States who has asked publicly and privately his vice president to do something about it, despite the fact that the vice president has no power to change the vote of the American people. Have we seen anything like this before? We've talked about 2005. We've talked about 1969 when there were narrow objections raised. But can you recall anything in your study of history that resembles what we'll see today?
No, there's really not. I mean, there's little signals along the way, but nothing of this scope and scale. Never an incumbent trying to overtly subvert the Constitution to hold on to power. I love that statement. The president says, the vice president and I are in agreement that he has the power to do this. That's about as meritorious as Willie, if you and I put out a statement that said, Willie Geist and I are in agreement that Vanderbilt should be in the national championship game.
Well, I do feel that way, but go ahead. Yeah.
Well, you could be in agreement, but who cares? It's just dissociated from reality.
Yeah.
And so there's always next year. But there's not always next year with the function of a democratic republic. And the vital thing about the country is that, yes, there are words on parchment. Yes, there's statutory law. There's all this written down law. But ultimately, a republic is a human undertaking. It is a manifestation of all of our characters, for good and for ill. And it requires and depends on people being willing to see politics as a mediation of differences, where some days you win and some days you lose, some mornings you win and some afternoons you lose. But you respect the process because you hold out the possibility that even if you lose in this hour, you might win in the next hour. What Trump has helped exacerbate is politics not as a mediation of differences, which is what it was designed to be, but politics as total war. To go back to Joe's question, the other thing Atlanta gave us is William T. Sherman. And basically, Donald Trump's vision of American politics is Shermanesque. It's total war, unrelenting war all the time. And what we're seeing today, hopefully, if all goes well, is the founders, for all their imperfections, their wisdom in action. And the character of the senators who have said that they don't believe the evidence of their eyes and of their minds, I believe are being fundamentally un-American. because they are rejecting self-evident truth for personal gain. And that's what an autocracy is. That's not a democracy.
Yeah. And it is Donald Trump's view of America is, and American politics is Sherman-esque, total war, unfortunately for the Republicans. He did scorch the earth all the way to the sea, but it was the Republican Party that he scorched. It was the Republican Party and that majority that it appears he destroyed over the past month with the help of Ted Cruz and with the help of Josh Hawley.
Yeah.
Here we have a party that was supposed to be about economics. They went from economics, they went from capitalism, they went from free markets to talking about QAnon conspiracy theories. And as one person on Twitter wrote last night, the suburbs were listening. The people in the suburbs were listening, and ends up that what you say, Josh Hawley, does have an impact. What you say, Ted Cruz, does have an impact, and the impact has been devastating for the Republican Party. Good luck with Chairman Bernie Sanders running the Budget Committee. He's there by the grace of you and Josh Hawley and Donald Trump. Enjoy it.
John Meacham, thank you very much. And Casey Hunt, thank you as well. We'll be looking for your reporting today on the protests in D.C. amid today's certification vote of Biden's victory. Reverend Al, we want to get your reaction to yesterday's development out of Kenosha, Wisconsin. The police officer, who was white and who was caught on a cell phone recording shooting Jacob Blake, a black man, in the back 7 times, will not face criminal charges. Kenosha District Attorney Michael Gravely announced that Officer Rustin Shesky, who's been on administrative leave since August 23rd, that shooting that day, will not be charged because Blake was armed with an open knife and he was holding that in his right hand when he went back to the vehicle. Gravely's report says video verifies that Blake, who survived the shooting and is now paralyzed from the waist down, was holding a knife. According to Gravely's report Tuesday, Blake told investigators that he dropped the knife near the vehicle and picked it up intending to put it in the car because it was a gift he wanted to keep. Gravely said he believed a jury would conclude the shooting had been self-defense. According to local NPR, Blake's uncle called the decision, quote, a slap in the face by the Wisconsin government, but called on people to rise up in a nonviolent way. Blake's shooting was among those that sparked protests last year and again last night over police violence against black suspects. Reverend Al?
Well, when the news came out, I happened to be in Columbus, Ohio, during the eulogy of an unarmed victim of police shooting Andre Hill with the Attorney General of Black America, Attorney Ben Crump, who represents the Blake family. And I was not surprised the local prosecutor would do this. But as I talked to Jacob Blake Sr. last night and Attorney Crump, how do you have a young man moving away from you claiming self-defense? He was going the other way. He was getting in the car. So what made it necessary for this officer to shoot him 7 times in the back when he's fleeing from him? So even if you want to say the young man had a knife, he was not using a knife pursuing you. He was running away from you. I think this is an absolute judicial disgrace, and I will be standing with Jacob Blake Sr. and others trying to pursue ways that they can get redress in terms of the examination of the facts, because clearly self-defense does not appear to even be within the realm of reality if you look at that tape of a young man running in the other direction and the policeman chasing him and then shooting him in the back 7 times.
Reverend Al, thank you. And we'll have you back, of course, with us at 8 a.m. Eastern Time when Senator-elect Reverend Raphael Warnock joins us. And coming up, Mitch McConnell in the minority. John Hammond previews what the Senate would look like if Democrats pull out a win in that second Georgia race as well. Morning Joe is coming right back.
Hi, it's MSNBC's Hayes Brown. You know, these days there's just so much news to wrap your head around, it's challenging to get a deeper understanding of things. So every morning, go beyond the headlines with MSNBC Daily. It features written perspectives from people you know and trust, including Charmaine Lee, Mehdi Hassan, Liz Plank, and Frank Figliuzzi. They'll take you inside the most important issues of our times. Issues like systemic racism, domestic terrorism, and how we can bridge our political divide. Plus, you'll get a fresh take every morning from me. Start your day with MSNBC Daily at msnbc.com.